Hello and welcome to the Kent Teach webinar all about School-Centred Initial Teacher Training, or SCIT for short. We're joined today by KMT. We have Polly, who is the head of KMT, Jenna, who is the deputy head of KMT, and we have Shefika, who is the head of recruitment and operations. These lovely ladies run one of Kent's longest running teacher training programmes. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what you guys do with your training teachers?
Thank you. So at KMT we've been training teachers for nearly 30 years and we're now one of the largest and most highly regarded accredited providers of teacher training in the region. We train across the whole of Kent, Medway, South East London and down into Sussex, and we split our training up into regional hubs. So you can train as a primary or secondary teachers in any of the hubs across that region. So we have East Kent, North Kent, West Kent and Sussex and Mid Kent to make the commute to training a little bit more manageable. We work with over 250 partnership schools on any given year, so we're able to really tailor and personalise training to wherever a trainee might live, and also to make sure all of our training is specific to the area in which they're placed.
As an associate teacher, you will get lots of support from the KMT Hub team while you're training in your placement school, and within the placement school you would also be supported by a school-based mentor and by a professional tutor, so support on lots of levels during your journey towards gaining QTS.
Fabulous. So what is the difference between a SCIT and an accredited provider?
Okay, so there's lots of acronyms in education, and SCIT is one of those. Essentially, SCIT stands for School-Centred Initial Teacher Training, so it covers all teacher training that's based in school as a type of training route that you can do in many ways. An accredited provider, such as KMT, we deliver our own curriculum, we write our own curriculum, and we're accountable to Ofsted. So there's a small number of accredited providers operating across the region, and KMT is one of those.
So we went through that accreditation process over the last couple of years, and actually in the first round of that we were one of only 80 providers nationally that gained re-accreditation within that first round. So when you're a potential teacher training candidate and you're looking around at your different options, you can of course go with an accredited provider that's been through that process. You may also come across that SCIT term, and that may mean that provider is a delivery partner of a different accredited provider. So it's really about your options around kind of who has ownership over that curriculum. Yeah. And our curriculum is very much designed with the needs of our region in mind, as Polly alluded to earlier.
So I think for those considering coming into teaching, it's always really important when you're searching for courses on Apply, or potentially going to meet schools to discuss whether there's training there for you, it's to really think about who the accredited provider is, because they can, although we're all delivering courses that lead to qualified teacher status, there's lots of differences in the way that the curriculum's delivered, and in many cases what's covered and the optional enhancements that are available. So in whatever route you choose to go down, it's always really important just to check who's that accredited provider and get in touch with them directly to find out absolutely what the training is going to involve.
Because I can imagine it's quite a personal thing, so people want to make sure that they've chosen the right programme for them and for the best way for them to learn.
Yeah, very much. And I think one of the biggest considerations actually for applicants is where they're going to be placed. And that is a real benefit of SCIT provision, for those that are worried about that, to know that your teacher training is school centred, to know that you're going to be interviewed by the school and placed in that school, and you're not going to have a somewhere that's maybe a 40-minute commute sort of thrown at you, and we're finding that that's become the most important factor in many ways for those, especially for non-bursary subjects where they're having to support themselves.
So what qualifications would you need in order to join the KMT programme?
So some applicants, they don't have all the GCSE requirements, so sometimes they might not have the C or 4 in maths, for example. So again, it's really important to check with the accredited provider about what their process is to support you if you don't have those. For example, at KMT we offer in-house equivalencies free of charge for applicants who have accepted offers with us, so sometimes that can just give them the confidence to know it's not going to slow down their application process.
Yeah. So anyone that needs to have an overseas qualification checked as well, and they can use a service known as ENIC, which is the UK National Agency for Checking Overseas and International qualifications. So we would need that to be able to verify that their degree meets the criteria.
And I think also what's important there is often when we get ENIC statements, they've got the ENIC statement for their degree, but actually they don't have it for their high school equivalent if they've been to high school abroad. So that's really important again for applicants, just to check that off, get that statement of comparability, and at the same time that you're doing for the degree, make sure that you get it for the GCSE or high school equivalents as well.
And if your high school qualifications come through as not comparable, it's not a barrier to joining the programme. You would just take one of the equivalency tests.
Yeah, and it is something that we recommend candidates do quite early on in the application process, or even before they're sort of thinking about applying, because it can take some time to come back as well.
Yeah, and I hope it gets their expectations set as well, to know kind of what they're coming into the course and what they're needing to achieve. Do you get a lot of overseas candidates coming?
Increasingly, actually, over the last sort of 24 months, I would say there's been an increase. We have seen some this year, but it's a really diverse intake actually. And we get overseas applicants, but also career changers and people coming from different backgrounds. So it's of a cohort of sort of average 250 for us every year. We do. We're surprised every year about how diverse it's becoming.
So, what would be the difference between a PGCE and a school's direct route?
So I think what's really important to remember is that all those courses lead to qualified teacher status, and I think often it's like, well, what do I get at the end? It's always QTS. So as long as you make sure that any course that you apply for, and it will be the same whether it's a postgraduate teacher apprenticeship, whether it's school director route, whether it's salaried or unsalaried or a PGCE, you will end up with qualified teacher status at the end, which is really important to remember, and I think that can sometimes cause a bit of confusion. With school direct routes, so those like we're talking about, the ones that SCIP providers can offer, accredited providers like ourselves, it's a very hands-on programme. You're a member of that school team from day one. You know where you're going to train. You apply directly to that school through us. We organise the interview with the school, and that means that you can start getting familiar with the building, but with the people that you're going to be working with from day one, and you're based in school for 4 days a week as part of that team. And we call our trainees associate teachers because that's very much what they are with this school-centred route. But ultimately at the end, qualified teacher status is going to be the outcome.
Yeah, and the PGC aspect is interesting actually if you're a candidate who's looking around at your options. So as Polly said, QTS is what you need to qualify to be able to teach. So you don't necessarily need a PGC qualification to be a qualified teacher. So some programmes will come with the PGC wrapped up with your QTS qualification. What we offer is an option to our candidates. So you can do QTS only, and bearing in mind, lots of people are feeling the pinch of the cost of living at the moment. So that means in terms of your tuition fees, if you're going down the non-salaried fee-funded route, your student loan is only for the cost of gaining QTS, and then you have an optional PGC add-on. So if gaining the PGC qualification is something that is important to you, you can choose to add that on. If you just want to gain QTS only, which fully prepares you and qualifies you to teach, you can do a QTS only option too. So when you're shopping around, that is something that's important to look out for too, is what's important to you in terms of the qualifications you want to get at the end. You know that you need the QTS element, but do you want the add-on or not? The main consideration around that we hear from our candidates is the option to teach abroad in the future. So if you do think you might like to teach abroad, then having the PGC element is something that you would need. If your priority is only about teaching in this country at the moment, then you just need QTS. And with the university provider that we work with, for example, to do our PGC add-on, there are further flexibility options around when you do the PGC too. So you can do it during your training year or in either of your ECT years as well. So there are loads of flexibility there essentially if you're a candidate. So it's important to know what's important to you. Do you really need the additional add-on? When would you like to do it? When's most convenient to you? What are the costs involved? But knowing that all you need to teach here is QTS. So
And also, I mean, it would be important to check with the provider, but I know it's for us, and it's the case with many other providers, that you can actually make that decision at interview. So you can decide whether or not you want to do the PGC optional enhancement actually once you've spoken to us that's interviewing you, or the other provider, and that can it means you're not going to get it wrong. You're not going to apply for the wrong course. You can very much have that conversation at the time just to make sure that it's right for you.
It's amazing that there's so many different options now, because when I was looking, I did a BA in primary education that came with QTS, so it's lovely that there's so many different routes in, and that we can have so many more different people coming into the teaching profession to provide their expertise on subjects.
And I think it's not even just the different routes, it's also the pathways within that route. So for example, some flexible learning, so 4-day-a-week programmes that obviously span a longer time than one academic year. Also that school-centred route where you know where you're going to go, or there's a university route where you know you're going to be travelling to the university. So there's lots of different models of delivery, as well as those different outcomes at the end.
Yeah, and even within, I spoke about our QTS route with the optional PGC add-on, and I spoke a little bit about student loan and tuition fees. There are options to train as well where there aren't any tuition fee implications for the trainee. So lots of our partner schools offer the postgraduate teacher apprenticeship or postgraduate employment-based route. So that's where the tuition fee is either covered by the school, so on the salaried or employment-based route, or it's covered by the apprenticeship levy on the postgraduate teacher apprenticeship route. So in both of those cases, you can engage in this school-centred route. So you're at least 4 days a week in school, you've got your essential-based training day with us, and there are no tuition fee implications for the candidate. They're covered in other ways, and you actually earn a salary while you train to teach as well. So
it's important to again get in touch with the provider, ring and make sure it's the accredited provider that you get in touch with, because they will be able to give you direct information to say, actually, these are the routes that we offer, these are the employment-based routes, talk to you about the differences and what that means. And all providers are so happy to get these inquiries and talk to people prior to making an application. So we always advise anybody to do that.
Particularly if you're currently working in a school, so maybe you're a learning support assistant or a teaching assistant, and you're just about to gain your degree, or you have a degree and you're thinking, this is my next step, I really want to train to teach. Get in touch with us and we can help communicate with your school as well on your behalf, and support them to see if something like the salaried route or the teacher apprenticeship would be a viable option.
Fabulous. So what does the training kind of look like? Roughly how long would it take, and how much teaching would they kind of get to do in the classroom?
So on our programme, for example, there's 4 stages of training. The first stage is transition, and that actually begins with 2 very focused days before the start of the term at the beginning of the academic year, and then runs for that sort of first 5 weeks. And that's a real opportunity for very intensive supported observations of expert colleagues, a lot of unlearning and challenging your own assumptions about education and what you think you know about education, lots of expert input before you even start to plan and deliver yourself. So once that's ended, they'll move into the early stage, which will run up until Christmas, and that's when we'll start to see the first teaching. Of course, it's going to start off gradually, sometimes just delivering the beginning of a lesson, starting off by, for example, looking at rules and routines, looking at checking understanding, that initial questioning at the start of a lesson. But it actually builds up then to about 10 or 11 hours of solo teaching by Christmas. Now, solo teaching doesn't mean being on your own in the room, and I think that again is sometimes when people think about school-centred initial training, think, I'm just going to be thrown in on my own. Of course, that just wouldn't be appropriate. So at all times, certainly on our programme, you will have that mentor with you, or a qualified member of staff who's a subject specialist with you at all times. That's so that you can team teach and build up, but also so you're getting that in-the-minute feedback, and that's essential in order to progress. In the next stage of training, so that starts in January and runs up till Easter, that's normally, and certainly for us, when the B placement takes place. So when you'd spend up to 6 weeks, say, in a separate school, a contrasting school, because when you qualify, you're going to qualify to teach in any school, not just the school that you spend the majority of your training. So that's a really important point. as you approach the end of your training, yes, it's the late stage, but for us that runs in parallel with that transition into early career. So it can be a really daunting time, as you know that you're going to be going from having that mentor with you all of the time to actually, your own classes and your own rules, and actually putting into place all of this training that you've had. So we actually run that stage in parallel with transition into early career for that reason, and we work very closely with the teaching school hubs who support you during the next 2 years of your training. So you have your initial teacher training year, which leads to qualified teacher status, and then there's those 2 further years of really good support that you get in school as an early career teacher. So we aim to make that transition as seamless as possible. And actually I'd say that's another really good question to ask any provider that you phone up, actually how you support me at the end, moving into my ECT years, what partnerships are in place to help me with that, and a close partnership with a teacher school hub is really, really going to help. And actually the teacher school hub delivers a lot of our sessions, for example, during that stage, to make sure that they're as well equipped as they can be.
In terms of that progression as well during the training year, we're really mindful as well, of course, that those coming to us on the employment-based route, the salaried route or the teacher apprenticeship, they're coming generally with previous school experience, they're going to be employed by the school, so those candidates can make use of that previous experience, and they're likely to begin with some element of a teaching timetable earlier on in the programme, but they are of course absolutely still supported by that school-based mentor, their professional tutor, so they are very much still engaging in a training experience, although they are employed members of staff and they may have greater responsibility from early on. They will, for example, be able to teach their own classes as well because they are employees with that previous experience, but they are always supported the whole way through their training.
The training experience is not watered down for them, but at points it will be tailored to make sure it's really appropriate for them as those with a bit more experience. I think another question we get asked a lot in terms of what is it going to look like, what's my week going to look like, and again that's really important to find out beforehand because that can differ quite a lot between different providers, so really important to find that out. For us, all of our trainees regardless of route are in school for 4 days a week. So they're part of the team, they're treated as a member of staff or as an associate teacher, and they're observing or engaging in activities within school or teaching during those 4 days. For us, Thursdays is training day, so it might not be the same for all providers, of course, but there will be that element of training, so ask when that is and what it is. So for us that's Thursdays, and that's every Thursday, and that runs throughout the programme, so you've got that dedicated day where you're going to be not only engaging in learning but supported intensively either in your subjects or by an external expert or by your programme lead as well. We get asked a lot about travel to training and remote sessions, and of course a blended curriculum is really important now, and we have access to all sorts of possibilities for delivering training remotely. So we have a blend of that where we have many online sessions, and many providers will do the same, but we still have that face-to-face element. And I think there's really no replacement for that face-to-face element. Teaching is a face-to-face profession, and the professional networks that you build with your subject cohort and with your wider cohort are absolutely essential as you move into early career. Those face-to-face time is when you get to network, you get to learn, and you really get to have that intense discussion about what you're doing in your school. So a blended curriculum is the future, it's the way, and it's here to stay, absolutely. However, nothing will replace that face-to-face time, but it's that very careful decision of what should be face-to-face and making sure there's a benefit to coming together for that.
Another, I suppose, really key thing to find out as well is when you start in your placement. So trainees with us, for example, they're in school from the school's first inset day, so you're part of that annual staff training, you're there on the pupils' first day, so you're part of that relationship building. The pupils know you as the associate teacher who's associated with their class, and you're there from day one when those rules and routines and expectations are all being established, and then you've got your consistent Thursday day with us. We don't front load kind of the theory bit, and in that sense, and you don't miss out on those really important first few weeks. You're in school from day one, and you've got your regular Thursday day with us. And if you're, for example, like a parent or somebody who's got family or caring responsibilities, it's really helpful to know that that training day is consistent each week, and that you know in advance when you need to travel, when you can be online, so you can really kind of plan your other commitments around your training. You know, it's one of those really important things to find out, because it can be tricky to manage those additional responsibilities if your training day isn't consistent, or if you need to travel or study for a week at a time, and you know, it can be, depending on your circumstances, you know, a potential barrier to engaging. But by having that consistent regular day, you know exactly what's expected of you and when, all of the time. So it's really straightforward then when it comes to thinking about how you'll be able to engage with your training and succeed at it.
And after any face-to-face training session, even the first one that they have, the WhatsApp groups begin, the lift sharing begins, and you know those relationships are built in that face-to-face time. So it's a very important part of the programme.
Because I think the community around becoming a teacher as well is also really important, drawing on each other and kind of being able to have the open communication about maybe what somebody else is experiencing, and getting some advice from peers as well as from the people that are there to support you.
When we're online, of course, you know, we do breakout groups and you've got those break-off discussions, but as everybody will remember from having spent several years of our lives online recently, you know, those online discussions are great, but there is no replacement in that sense to those face-to-face conversations, actually sitting around a table with your peers and getting stuck into a group discussion.
And studying with that group of people. You know, so very recently I went to a new school, and the new head teacher of this new school that had joined our partnership actually did my training year with him, and that happens so often in education, that you always come across these people again and again and again in your career, and very often those professional relationships have started as early as in your training year.
And you want to be able to get practical and hands-on with your learning as well. You don't want your training programme to just be learning about a subject. You want to have experience of doing it and to get feedback from experts in those training sessions. And that's something you get from the face-to-face element.
Because teaching is definitely a vocation. It's something that you kind of have to learn by doing. As much as we can all learn the wonderful pedagogy behind it, it comes from practice and experience as well.
Completely.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about funding and some potential bursaries. So what kind of costs come with learning to train through a skip?
Yeah, so our fees in particular are £7,495. That's just for the QTS only, as we discussed earlier. And if you wanted to sort of add in the PGC enhancement, that's £9,250. So in total, that's what you would be looking at paying. Some secondary subjects do attract a bursary. Or a scholarship, so of up to 30,000 for shortage subjects. So that's great if you can get hold of that. That's brilliant. But it does change every year depending on DFE sort of funding.
Okay.
We get lots of questions about, well, how, you know, I'm a maths trainee, how am I going to get the bursary? Well, as the provider, the accredited provider, we make sure that you get that. So once you've accepted a place, then the provider will go through the process of making sure that you receive the bursary in those shortage subjects.
And if you're, for example, undertaking non-salaried primary training or a non-bursary subject, you might be thinking as well, how am I going to support myself through the year? So you can, of course, obtain the student loan to cover the tuition fee element. There's a great calculator on the DFE's website which allows you to work out whether you'd also be eligible for a maintenance loan. And then depending on your circumstances, there are lots of additional grants and allowances you might be eligible for. So things like a childcare grant, parents' learning allowance. If you are a carer or you have other dependents, there are allowances for that as well. So
and phone up your provider and ask them, you know, what support do you think that I could get? Because, you know, we deal with this all of the time. We deal with these queries all the time, and we're very often able to just point applicants to grants that they didn't realise were available. So, you know, that's really important to do before applying, so that you know if you can support yourself during that year.
Absolutely. As Polly said, like, we understand that is one of the key crucial questions that someone wants to have answers for, and we speak to people daily to help them with that. So.
Yeah, I think having that open communication as well is really important, because, like you say, if they can't afford the course, they might think, oh, well, I can't go into this, but I think they don't realise that actually the best people to kind of help answer that are the people that are providing that course, because they will have themselves had to find out where they can get their funding from.
Yeah, and some, we work with a variety of trusts, of course, that want to take on trainee teachers, and many of those trusts have financial incentives themselves for trainees to support the cost of living. They often call them cost of living payments. So again, phone up the provider, say, are there any trusts that you work with that are offering these payments? Because there's actually a lot out there that just isn't advertised. So, and the provider is best placed to know all of that information for you.
Yeah. And quite often the conversation around the fees then sparks the conversation about the training route as well, because we quite often see that people, we understand they want a salary, but are they actually suitable to undertake a salaried training route? And then we sort of have that conversation and they realise actually the non-salaried route is better for them.
And of course you gain QTS by the first week in July, our programme for example, and you're actually eligible for ECT employment from that point. So several of our trainees every year, when they gain QTS, are lucky enough to be able to take up their ECT posts from July. So you're then earning an income over the summer, which is really helpful in terms of getting that income stream coming back in after your training year.
Increasingly as teacher recruitment is challenging for some schools. We are seeing that our trainees are achieving QTS and immediately getting exactly that, and they're getting employed from the 1st of July, and that's really great to see. We have really high recruitment retention rates for our partnership schools, and that's something to find out about. What is the sort of proportion of those that remain in their school and get employed at the end, because with these sort of school-centred routes it tends to be pretty good.
I think because of our large network of schools, we're often the first people to hear about internal positions anyway that we can then advertise to our trainees, so that they can get those before they go out elsewhere and advertised online.
Of course, if you're on the salaried route, you've got a contract for the duration of the academic year anyway, so you've got that certainty around your income. If you're a teacher apprenticeship, your contract would actually run for 15 months. So if you're on the postgraduate teacher apprenticeship route, you will complete the training year as the rest of your cohorts will, but you will actually continue to be employed into the first 3 months of your ECT year. And the ideal scenario there, of course, is that your employing school would then be able to offer you a continuing contract after that point. And if not, then we would support you in other vacancies that we hear of, or if your school is part of an academy trust, they typically then try to find you a permanent or other fixed term contract in another one of their partner schools.
I think that's kind of what most people worry about, isn't it? When they finish their training, it's like, oh, okay, I'm qualified now, what's going to happen next? So I think having that security there of maybe continuing that kind of relationship with that school or learning about those internal posts can be really useful.
Yeah, and again, that is a question we get all the time, like when they call up the recruitment team, that what actually happens after that year, and we always say it's a qualification for life, there's not really much else that's going to change that. You'll learn different things along the way, of course you will, and you might gain extra qualifications, but once you've got your QTS, you can teach anywhere.
Definitely. And I think as well, Kent Teach do a lot to try and help our ECTs coming into the career, and we're really passionate about making sure that we have those lifelong teachers that are coming through from all of the different training routes, and I think working together like this is something that we can.
And you very often see, don't you, on the adverts, for teaching posts, suitable for an ECT, and that's ideal, because that means that a school is thinking ahead. They're thinking, actually we've got a strong department here. We could support somebody new into their career. We have got the mentoring capacity. So those are the schools that absolutely want to get into, visit, and again we can support with visits to schools, and all those sorts of worries that trainees have about where they're going to end up. It's highly unlikely that at the end of the training year that trainees leave not knowing where they're going off to in either July or September.
We're seeing increasingly as well schools want to work with a training provider who has an association with a teaching school hub, so there's that continuation as well from the first year of this training element of your career into the next 2 years of your ECT entitlement. And of course we, for example, work with Thames Gateway Teaching School Hub, so lots of our partner schools are also Thames Gateway partner schools, so there's that real communication about
it's a seamless transition through the 3 years, and there's no what you don't want to train to feel like is that there's any gap for them, that they're just kind of left in between. Actually it's a 3-year entitlement, you just get QTS after the first year.
So quite a lot of people who come into teaching often start life as kind of a teaching assistant, or they're working in a school and think, oh, actually, this is the school for me. So how would they go about kind of approaching training to be a teacher?
Yeah, so the first point of contact really is the recruitment team. So if they just contact myself or Katie or Heidi, any one of us can kind of help them and guide them towards what they need to do in terms of organising that within their school. So if the school isn't currently one of our partner schools, it really is like a sort of simple form filling exercise, like further to conversations with the course programme leaders as to about what that looks like, and Polly and Jenna would sort of sign off that paperwork, and then the school joins the consortium from there, and then we can then publish any places for those particular candidates to apply for.
Yeah, and especially with the new teacher apprenticeship, schools might not have engaged with that before, so they might have lots of questions about what that involves and how do they access their levy funding and what would the salary need to be, and we can, as well as supporting the candidate, we can also support their school with answering all those questions and helping them get access to the levy funds to support their candidate with their training.
And we're seeing that a lot. You know, we're getting direct inquiries. You know, I'm a TA. My school's agreed I can do this. What do we do? You know, you contact us or whichever provider you're going to work for and what you're going to train with, and ultimately, you know, we can support both sides of that exactly.
So, what would be the minimum salary on a salaried route into teaching?
So if you're on the postgraduate employment-based route, the salaried route, or the postgraduate teacher apprenticeship route, the salary is at least 0.1 on the unqualified scale. And of course then there are different pay scales depending on where your school is located. So we go all the way up into South East London, so you might have schools that are earning that London Fringe pay scale, or it might be the rest of England pay scale. So it's important to check where your placement school is and which salary scale that puts you on, but it is at least 0.1 on that scale during your training year. For all of our trainees, no matter what route they're on, as soon as they gain QTS, they're then eligible to move to the main pay scale, so M1 on the main pay scale from the point they're awarded QTS.
And again, depending on experience, sometimes that salary can be negotiated, you know, within an interview or post-interview to reflect the experience of somebody coming in. So yes, the minimum absolutely is unqualified 1 on the unqualified teacher pay scale, but it can sometimes be more than that.
Yeah, there may be other additional allowances as well. So if you're undertaking your training in a special school or specialist provision, that often attracts additional allowances too.
Fabulous. So what would be the difference between kind of salaried and non-salaried places in terms of what you need to kind of access each of those?
We typically look for previous school experience for those on an employment-based route. So it's likely that you'll have worked in a school for a number of years, and that might have been in a support role, like a teaching assistant or learning support assistant. You might have been a cover supervisor. There are so many different roles you can undertake in schools now, but that you've got practical experience in schools of teaching and learning, and this is really about the next step in your career that, you know, your school and the provider are supporting you with.
The interview process can be quite different, can't it?
Yeah, so part of the salaried interview process involves them being observed teaching part of a lesson, just so that we can determine that they are, you know, suitable to go forward for that training, and from day one of their training be able to be left alone in the classroom and hold that class.
Yeah, and they're ultimately employees of the school on that salaried route. You know, they're receiving a salary, they're onboarded as an employee. You know, yes, you know, we will also be supporting them as their accredited provider who will award QTS, but they are an employee of the school. For an unsalaried trainee, you know, they're our responsibility in total. You know, we will interview them, yes, in partnership with the school, and we will make them an offer for that particular school, so that won't change. But ultimately, they're our responsibility during that time.
Yeah, for the non-salaried route, you don't necessarily need school experience going into that route. So if you're a new graduate, if you're a career changer, if you've been, you know, out of employment for a while, you don't have to have, you know, volunteered or worked in a school to go down the non-salaried route, but we encourage all of our prospective associate teachers to spend some time in school. So that might either be before they apply or even after their interview. We can support them with getting some volunteer time in schools or some school experience days, and that's a really important kind of pre-program experience, because it really validates that feeling of, yes, this is the career for me. It kind of increases that enthusiasm and excitement for your training here, and you can be sure that that placement school is a great fit for you, that you've chosen the right phase. You know, if there was any kind of debate about whether primary or secondary was the right phase for you, you can be sure that you've made the right choice. And
also it means that when you get made an offer, the offer will say the school that you're going to train at. And I would always advise those that are doing their interviews, and when their offers start coming in of places to train, don't accept that offer until you know exactly which school you're going to be placed in, because that's one of the reasons for doing this route, that you've done your interview with the school, you know where you're going to be, you accept that offer knowing what it is, and because that's the real benefit in doing it.
And I think like our experience of recruiting people who know exactly where they're going, that we're often told that it's just alleviated so much anxiety. They just know exactly what they're doing, they can plan, it's just great. It's just the best way to do it.
And just something else I wanted to pick up on there with the differences between interview. Yes, we say we're salaried. Yes, they're going to teach a lesson or part of a lesson as part of that interview process, because essentially they will take on that teaching responsibility straight away. But with unsalaried routes, that's not the case. So we wouldn't expect somebody without any experience who'd applied for a non-salaried route to teach as part of their interview, because ultimately that's what we're doing as a provider during that training year. We're going to train them and equip them to teach properly. So the interview tends to be about an hour, plus a tour of the school, meeting key people, and it's very much a discussion-based part of the interview to give them as much opportunity to ask us questions as we will for them. There's very often a presentation as part of which is focused on their subject or a particular subject within primary, and it's very much a partnership between us as the accredited provider and then the school as the host for that trainee during the training year.
Yeah, and if you're looking at applying to train to teach and you're not sure what school to apply to, maybe you've got no kind of personal ties to a school or experience of different schools, and you're looking on the apply system and you're thinking, I don't know which one to choose. You can do the obvious, looking at the school's website, looking at their Ofsted reports, kind of if you've got any kind of friends or family who have associations with that school, but it's no substitute really for going into the school. So if you contact the provider that works with that school, we can arrange for you to visit that school or a number of schools, so that when you do apply, you know that this is where I want to train to teach.
Yeah, and I think just navigating that process in general can be quite confusing for people. A lot to do with the codes that you need to apply. We have that daily. Again, people call us and they just don't know where to start. So our general code for sort of applying to KMT would be K30, for example, and then there's additional codes per subject that would need to be added. So through conversation with us, we can then guide you into the right direction. And getting the sort of prior school experience as well. I know we briefly touched on it there, but we do have a section on our website where we sort of quite often update that with different events and things that are going on.
And I think a lot of schools would just benefit from anybody kind of asking to help out. I mean, quite a lot of schools are quite open to having volunteers come in to help with reading, especially towards the end of the summer, where you've got quite a lot of activities going on, and even if it's just helping with a summer fair, you're still kind of in that school environment, really getting a feel for what that school's like. So with the salaried route, would they be in the classroom on their own, or would they have a partner teacher still?
So if you're on any of the employment-based routes, what's great about a school-centred route to train to teach is that your training can really be individualised to you. So on those employment-based route, we talked about that person having previous school experience and being ready to take on some teaching from day one. But depending on the school, depending on that trainee's individual requirements, the requirements of the pupils, what their starting timetable is, depends on all of those individual circumstances. So we've got some candidates who might go in as, quite a considerable teaching timetable from the beginning, and we've got others who might build up their teaching gradually, just like a non-salaried candidate. So those circumstances are really individual to the candidate, the needs of the school, the needs of the pupils, but there's always a professional discussion, usually around the interview stage, of what that's going to look like. So you're not surprised in September when you're handed your timetable. As an employee, you can teach unsupervised, but as Polly said earlier, you're not just left to do it, to teach by yourself. This is a training year. You're an employee and you've got those responsibilities, but you're also there to train to teach. So your school-based mentor will be there supporting you. They'll be giving you feedback weekly on your practice. You'll have your 1 hour weekly mentor meeting with that person as well, where they further help to develop your practice and make links with your KMT training so that you're definitely implementing that in the classroom. But how much teaching that you do solo, unsupervised, depends on your previous experience and the needs of the school and the needs of those pupils in your class or classes. On the non-salaried route, of course, you always have a qualified teacher there to support you while you're teaching. So,
and these things are really important because you only get your training year once. There will never be a time as a teacher where you have that much dedicated time to your own learning and development, a mentor on hand for you all the time. And, you know, as anyone applying to training, they need to ask themselves, actually, is this the provider and is this the school that's going to give me the highest quality training that I can possibly have in this unique year that I'm about to embark on?
Yeah, you're not there as a cover teacher, you're not there, you know, to be a teacher on a, you know, the unqualified scale who's expected to already know it all and do it all. You're there to gain QTS, and it is very much a training experience throughout. You'll still get to undertake focused observations of other expert practice, even if you're on an employment-based route. You'll be able to get out of your own class and engage in those learning opportunities. You'll of course do a second school placement where you get to go and practice at a different school entirely as part of your training year, and there's also the introduction of what's called intensive training and practice this year as well. So all providers are introducing these additional focus weeks where we take a really close look at a particular area of the teacher training curriculum and really hone in on, you know, what's involved in that aspect of teaching and learning, and you get to see it in practice in lots of different schools. You get to work with your mentor to put it in practice in your own school. So no matter what route you're on, you get the full training experience. So your Thursday Central based training days, doesn't matter what route you're on, you get that same high quality experience. You get all the additional experiences, the second school, the intensive training and practice. You get your weekly mentor feedback, your weekly mentor meetings, but the build-up of your timetable is unique to you. And that's actually true for all of the routes.
Yeah, it is,
We have milestones at different points of the year we would like trainees to meet, but if you're someone who's really high achieving trainee and you can progress quicker, you can and you will. If you're somebody who needs more support, then we can slow things down and put a more gradual, small step approach in place for you as well.
I think that would put a lot of people at ease, because sometimes when you hear about these school-centred routes, you think, oh, I'm just being dropped in a classroom and
but certainly they used to be that way, and you know that's absolutely not the case anymore. You know that you know all of the routes now, you know the support really will be there, and it's up to the candidate to just ask those questions of the provider to make sure that they know all the nuances between the programme. But that support is the first year of a journey. And nobody's just thrown in at the deep end.
And be certain, as the candidate, as the prospective trainee, be certain that your provider will advocate for you as well. So if you ever did find yourself in a situation where you felt, you know, the teaching load was inappropriate or the supervision element was inappropriate to the route you were on, be certain that your provider will make sure that you are getting your full training entitlement. That's a really important conversation to have with any prospective provider that you're thinking about going with.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about kind of the requirements needed to kind of get on these courses, but some people obviously might have struggled when they were in secondary school and might not have their maths or English, so what could they do to kind of help get them into the teaching career?
Yeah, so if you know a candidate hasn't got the right GCSEs in maths and English or science, then we can guide them in the direction of undertaking an equivalency test. So they can do that sort of independently and go off and do them with an external provider, or if they are made an offer with us, then we do have our own in-house one that we can give them to do.
Yeah, it's an important question to ask actually, because that will you know, really differ depending on which provider you talk to. So you know if that does apply to you, if you don't have one of those GCSE equivalents, just make sure you kind of up how are you going to support me to get this equivalency, and there's a range of support available.
Yeah, it's a really common thing again. You know, we see that again daily. You know, we have those questions being asked to us all the time. So yeah, just to put people at ease, really, there are ways to get those things sorted.
And lost certificates, that's another big one. So we can support with getting copies of those, or you know assessing knowledge in different ways.
Yeah, and again, I think think it's really important if you know that you haven't got the right GCSEs to start working on those sooner rather than later, because it does become a condition of an offer if you are offered a place that is in place before the training starts as well.
If you've got several equivalencies to do, you can stagger them as well, so you don't have to do them all in one go. And of course, the earlier you apply, the more time you have to complete them.
So they'd need those in place before, would they be able to complete the equivalencies as they go?
It's an entry requirement, so the degree and the GCSEs must be in place before the training commences.
Okay. So we often hear lots of acronyms about routes into teaching. I think it's really important that we have these conversations and that we can share the knowledge that we have about the different routes into training. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for your time. If you've got any questions about the KMT programme, about different routes into teaching, feel free to leave them in the comments below. One of the Kent Teach team will answer those. Or if you've got any questions about the KMT programme itself, I'm sure the KMT team would love to hear from you.
We would indeed.
Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. There are so many different routes into teaching. It's about finding the one that is the best fit for you. For further information about the different routes into teaching, or to talk to someone from the Kent Teach team about what route is right for you, use the information on kentteach.com.